Now, some of you might remember Steve Coogan got himself into one of these situations. He likes to drive quite fast, as Steve Coogan. He's been done a few times for speeding, but he managed to keep his licence the last time he was done on the grounds that not just did he need to have a car to do his job, but Alan Partridge, the fictitious character that he plays on television, needed the car to drive around in. And the judge unbelievably said, oh, well, that's all right then. Despite the fact that you don't exist as a person, Alan Partridge needs to have a car to drive around in, therefore you can continue to drive around. It seems bizarre. Let's talk to Nick Freeman, who knows a little bit about this sort of thing. Criminal defence lawyer, author and commentator, has been known in the past as Mr. Loophole. Nick, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
So, that was a bit of a sort of a trend-setting thing that happened to Steve Coogan now, it would seem.
Well, what happened with Steve Coogan was he got to 12 points or more. I don't remember how many points he had, and he argued, look, there'll be exceptional hardship, not really for him, but for the people who were working on the next production of his programme, and they were independent consultants, and they would have lost their work, and they would have suffered exceptional hardship because they wouldn't have been able to put food on the table for their families. So they were, if you like, the innocent victims.
I see.
Often when you have innocent victims, it's a much stronger argument than actually the defendant himself or herself, because they're in no way responsible
but
for
it still sounds like
what's coming their way. So, it wasn't really him, it was the people who were going to suffer as a consequence of his point.
But what his argument was based on was that basically if Alan Partridge couldn't work because he couldn't drive, somehow the show couldn't be made.
Well, the show wouldn't go on, and because it was short notice, because it was in the diary, it was going to happen. They couldn't get alternative work. It would have caused them big financial consequences.
Right.
And the court said, look, on the balance of probabilities, this is exceptional hardship. Once you get to 12 points, all that means is if you get to 12 points, you're off the road for 6 months, minimum period, straightforward. The court has a discretion if there is exceptional hardship. It can't be inconvenient. It's got to be exceptional hardship. You've got to prove it on the balance of probabilities. As I've indicated to you, if other people are going to suffer that hardship, whether it could be elderly or sick parents or family or children, it's a much stronger argument than yourself. If you're going to lose your employment, it doesn't necessarily mean it's exceptional hardship. It actually has to be exceptional hardship. And all that gives is the magistrates a discretion to say, well, yes, there is exceptional hardship. We're not going to disqualify you, or we can disqualify you for a lesser period, or we can disqualify for whatever period we want. So it just gives them a discretion to depart from those sort of mandatory 6-month disqualification periods.
But you'll forgive me, I'm sure, for saying this. It still sounds like something cooked up by a lawyer in a room.
It was cooked up by Parliament. The idea was very simply, Section 35 of the 1988 Act, they said, look, people that you get salesmen who are driving 50,000 miles a year, they might commit 5 offences, and there might be 36 in a 30, might be 79 on the motorway. They're not serious offences. If the consequences are so severe, we're going to give them one more chance, and that's one chance in a 3-year period. So you can only argue once in a 3-year period. That was Parliament's intention. And the problem now is that lawyers, because the legislation was drafted in a clumsy way, have the ridiculous situation where people are getting a whole host of offences, and we read today a chap with 66 points, 11 offences of failing to furnish, turns up at court, says, look, I will suffer exceptional hardship. He may suffer exceptional hardship, but in my view, the magistrates should exercise their discretion and say, yes, well, you will suffer exceptional hardship, but we're going to disqualify you, and we'll probably disqualify you for 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, looking at
and that's what should. So I don't understand, and obviously I haven't heard this case, haven't heard his mitigation. Obviously it was exceptional hardship, but to have 11 offences of failing to provide information through the driveway, each one attracts 6 points. He's pleaded guilty, so he hasn't got a defence, or he hasn't argued a defence. It's a very generous exercise of the discretion. The problem I have with it is it isn't what Parliament intended, and I've said time and time again, why doesn't Parliament get hold of it and just tighten that legislation up so that having one more chance for deserving cases is a good idea, but that's it.
Well, exactly. Because, I mean, it seems to me that because there is no specific definition of exceptional hardship, which might be very difficult to define legally, it is obviously going to be then open to massive interpretation, isn't it?
It is, but magistrates they're quite shrewd. They know what exceptional hardship is. You and I know what it is. If you hear the arguments, you can decide. Well, yeah, it's terribly inconvenient. Is it exceptional hardship? is it really going to be that far? It's a very high bar. And just with common understanding of the English language, we can work out what it is. You can't define it. It will be impossible to define it. So we rely on trained magistrates or judges to say, yea, it is, or no, it isn't.
Yes.
If it is, we have a discretion. You've committed one offence, we're going to exercise it in your favour. You've committed 10, absolutely not.
Right. Now, in the case, just to go back to this case of Steve Coogan for a moment, surely his hardship that he was describing was a temporary one, in the sense that, if you're filming something and you're worried that people are going to lose their livelihood because that filming has to be interrupted, surely by the time you finish the filming, then the hardship disappears. So they could have said to him, why don't you serve your ban after you've finished filming?
No, because the ban is with immediate effect.
Well, no, I get that, but why couldn't they have adjusted that and said...
Well, because I think it was scheduled. They've got there's a lot, as you will know, a lot booked in terms of makeup artists, film production sets, etc., for a program. It's all scheduled in. It's due to start on this date. And the problem with his case was the 6-month ban would erode into that working period, which meant that actually the work couldn't take place.
Yes. No, I get that. But why not wait until the work's over and then say, now you've got a 6-month ban?
Because everyone else has their diaries are full for maybe a year or 2 years ahead, so they wouldn't be able to do it.
But that's the problem with the law, it seems, in this country, because everyone that I've spoken to about that case thinks it's unfair, thinks it was given special treatment because of who he was, and all of that. Because if Joe Bloggs had gone into a situation like that and tried to convince a judge of exceptional hardship, he wouldn't have got anywhere near what Coogan was able to get away with. And so people perceive things to be unfair, and usually means that they are. And in the end, the law says, oh, well, we can interpret this and we can interpret that, but we can't interpret the sentence. Well, why not?
Well, I think, Mike, to be honest with you, if you're a celebrity or if you're somebody who's well known or you have a higher profile, you actually have more of an uphill battle. That's the reality. That's certainly the reality in my experience. Of course, you might have better representation because you've got deeper pockets and can afford better representation, and somebody can argue more persuasively for you.
Yeah.
But what you don't know is you don't read day in and day out of all the other cases because they just don't make the news.
Sure.
So you're using as a barometer a case that received a massive amount of publicity, and I understand your argument. I haven't heard all the facts of the case, so I can't. A court's made a decision. It made it not because of Steve Coogan, but because of the people who were working on set who would have lost their jobs, would have lost their remuneration during that period of time. And those are the people we should focus on. It actually had nothing to do with Steve Coogan. He was the defendant, but the hardship didn't relate to him. It related to others.
Yes.
I don't think the court for one second thought, Mr. Coogan, you're going to suffer exceptional hardship if you can't do this. It's the people whose jobs were dependent upon him.
Yes, but the net result, and I don't want to get stuck on this particular case, but the net result is that Steve Coogan doesn't get banned from driving when most people would have done.
Yeah,
that's the bottom line, isn't it?
Well, most people wouldn't have a production set waiting on hand whose livelihoods are dependent upon Steve Coogan being able to drive.
Yes, quite. But let's talk about the war on the motorists in general, because I don't know whether you know how many cases of speeding are taken, how many people are banned on an annual basis. It seems as though there are now many people who should have been banned, as many as 10,000 plus, as a result of this kind of loophole that are not being banned. And I'm afraid if they are recidivists, if they are people who are continually speeding, and if you've got 66 points in your licence, partly, as you say, for other reasons as well, these people might be dangerous.
I think that look, it's very easy to get a distorted view of what's happening. I think actually the number of people who are driving with more than 20 points on the licence is actually very few. But as I've said, it shouldn't happen, and it should have one more chance, so that the law needs to be taken hold of. I think the vast majority of cases that you're talking about, when you think, that there are millions and millions of people who drive on our roads, and there are millions and millions of people whose livelihoods are dependent upon their mobility. And when they fall foul of the law, they have one more chance, and they're clearly arguing successfully 10,000, whatever the figure was, isn't that many when you look at it in the context of the huge number of people who are actually driving and dependent upon their mobility. If you have a salesman who's travelling up and down the country and the cameras are everywhere and he's committed 5 offences over a 3-year period and he's travelling 50,000, 60,000 miles a year, the courts say, look, we're going to give you one more chance, and you can't argue that again. I don't think that's wrong. I think Parliament wisely gave the courts that discretion, and I think we don't want robotical court sentencing. We want a bit of discretion.
No, but we want also a law-abiding populace, generally speaking, and if people who break the law get away with it continually, then that makes it look bad, and it makes everybody else feel like, they're being hard done by.
But Mike, I think the statistics show something like 70% of people who drive admit speeding.
What's that got to do with it?
In such a poor state that you crawl along. So you say, right, I've got a meeting at 11 o'clock. I'm going to leave 2 hours for that meeting.
Yeah.
Inevitably, you're going to have terrible, terrible congestion. There are going to be unforeseen things that happen en route. So when you get a little bit of clear motorway, for example, you're going to say, look, I'm going to creep up to 80 miles an hour to try and make good the time. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. In my view, the speed limits on motorways are too slow. They should be increased.
But I bet you if they were, that would not stop people from speeding. It would just mean people speeded at higher speeds. So if you made it 90, you'd be getting passed by people doing 120.
No, I don't think you would, because I think actually, if you look at the 70 mile an hour, it was I think maximum speed of the Ford Anglia in 1957. You wouldn't want to go 70 miles an hour in a Ford Anglia. It's its maximum speed.
I wouldn't.
No. Most cars now travel very safely at 80 miles an hour.
No, I get that. But, all you got to do is go to Germany and see how fast people drive in Germany, because until up to relatively recently, my understanding is that they didn't even have speed limits on some of the autobahns there. And the speeds... a mate of mine was once driving in France, right? And he was driving down the sort of Rue de Soleil, whatever they call it, doing 90 miles an hour in his family car. He was overtaken by a guy towing a boat.
Yeah, well, look, you're always going to have idiots, and they need to be taken off the road. You're always, whatever law you introduce, there are always going to be one or two who you hopefully have your dash cam footage, and they're the ones that need to be removed for a long period of time. But the majority of motorists actually drive quite sensibly.
Yeah.
And quite responsibly.
Yes, no, I agree. But, your timing is perfect, because I'm looking at a story that's been released today. UK road commuters lost an average of 115 hours stuck in traffic last year.
£7 million.
It's horrendous. I was just saying at the weekend, I went to pick up my daughter from Gatwick Airport. The M23, which is the only road that goes to Gatwick Airport pretty much, was shut.
Yeah.
The whole road.
You look, I drove back from the south of France on Wednesday, and you drive from France to Cannes, which is 750 miles, and you sit without a hold-up. You just sit at a steady speed, and it's absolutely clear. There's never a problem. The moment you get into England, it's just mayhem.
Yeah. Do you think is that because of the toll roads? Do you think?
I think that look, we have smart motorways now. We've invested all this money in smart motorways.
Those are ridiculous.
And the lanes are too narrow. They're horrendously dangerous. Can you imagine driving along and you have a puncture, which can happen to anyone, and you're in a live lane, and where do you go? Because there's no refuse area. People who have designed this haven't actually, we need all along every motorway to have an immediate place for you to move to if you have a breakdown or if you have a puncture. And there is nowhere. So you have a stranded family. It's just... You can't imagine the stupidity that has gone into the design. And then, of course, you're provided with false information constantly. So people don't trust the gantry information because it's wrong.
Right.
Whereas abroad, it's spot on all the time. They'll say, broken lorry in lane 1, 2.5 kilometres, and lo and behold, it is. So you don't have a hold-up because you know that information is correct. So we have a road system in this country, and I don't know who's running it or what brain set they have, but in my view, and I think most other motorists' view, they don't seem to be thinking about it sensibly or responsibly, and I don't understand why. It's not rocket science, is it, just to get the system
No, absolutely. We can finish on a point on which we agree. Great. Nick, thank you very much indeed. Nick Freeman there, criminal defence lawyer, author, commentator. You can see why he's known as Mr. Loophole, can't you? A very clever man. But here's the thing. If you, as a motorist, are getting done, why shouldn't everybody else be getting done at the same time? It's not right for people to be getting away with breaking the law, in my view, whether it's speeding, whether it's failing to stop for a traffic light, whether it's a parking offence. If you're going to get tickets, why should somebody else be able to get off them just because they've got a smart lawyer? That doesn't seem right. But what about 115 hours spent sitting in traffic? Certainly feels like I've done a lot of that.